I will turn to the ranking member, Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. I appreciate that several of you had long journeys to make in order to be here. I appreciate you making the time. I look forward to your testimony. I want to thank Senator Blumenthal for convening this hearing, for being a leader on this topic. You know, a year ago, we couldn't have had this hearing because the technology that we're talking about had not burst into public consciousness. That gives us a sense, I think, of just how rapidly this technology that we're talking about today is changing and evolving and transforming our world right before our very eyes. I was talking with someone just last night, a researcher in the field of psychiatry, who was pointing out to me that the ChatGPT and generative AI, these large language models, it's really like the invention of the internet in scale, at least, and potentially far, far more significant than that. We could be looking at one of the most significant technological innovations in human history. And I think my question is, what kind of an innovation is it going to be? Is it going to be like the printing press that diffused knowledge and power and learning widely across the landscape, that empowered ordinary, everyday individuals, that led to greater flourishing, that led above all to greater liberty? Or is it going to be more like the atom bomb? Huge technological breakthrough, but the consequences, severe, terrible, continue to haunt us to this day. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think any of us in the room know the answer to that question, because I think the answer has not yet been written. And to a certain extent, it's up to us here and to us as the American people to write the answer. What kind of technology will this be? How will we use it to better our lives? How will we use it to actually harness the power of technological innovation for the good of the American people, for the liberty of the American people, not for the power of the few? You know, I was reminded of the psychologist and writer Carl Jung, who said at the beginning of the last century that our ability for technological innovation, our capacity for technological revolution had far outpaced our ethical and moral ability to apply and harness the technology we developed. That was a century ago. I think the story of the 20th century largely bore him out. And I just wonder, what will we say as we look back at this moment about these new technologies, about generative AI, about these language models, and about the hosts of other AI capacities that are even right now under development, not just in this country, but in China, at the countries of our adversaries, and all around the world. I mean, I think the question that Jung posed is really the question that faces us. Will we strike that balance between technological innovation and our ethical and moral responsibility to humanity, to liberty, to the freedom of this country? And I hope that today's hearing will take us a step closer to that answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Altman, I think you grew up in St. Louis, if
I did.
Not mistaken. It's great to see a fellow
Missouri is a great place.
Missourian here. It is. Thank you. I want that noted, especially underlined in the record. Missouri is a great place. That is the takeaway from today's hearing. Maybe we'll just stop there, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask you, Mr. Altman, I think I'll start with you. And I'll just preface this by saying my questions here are an attempt to get my head around and to ask all of you to help us to get our heads around what this generative AI, particularly the large language models, what it can do. So I'm trying to understand its capacities and then its significance. So I'm looking at a paper here entitled "Large Language Models Trained on Media Diets Can Predict Public Opinion." This is just posted about a month ago. The authors are Chu, Andreas, Anselabere, and Roy. And their conclusion, this work was done at MIT and then also at Google. Their conclusion is that large language models can indeed predict public opinion. And they go through and model why this is the case. And they conclude ultimately that an AI system can predict human survey responses by adapting a pre-trained language model to subpopulation-specific media diets. So in other words, you can feed the model a particular set of media inputs, and it can, with remarkable accuracy, and the paper goes into this, predict then what people's opinions will be. I want to think about this in the context of elections. If these large language models can, even now, based on the information we put into them, quite accurately predict public opinion, ahead of time, I mean, predict, it's before you even ask the public these questions, what will happen when entities, whether it's corporate entities or whether it's governmental entities or whether it's campaigns or whether it's foreign actors, take this survey information, these predictions about public opinion, and then fine-tune strategies to elicit certain responses, certain behavioral responses. I mean, we already know, this committee has heard testimony, I think 3 years ago now, about the effect of something as prosaic, it now seems, as Google search, the effect that this has on voters in an election, particularly undecided voters in the final days of an election who may try to get information from Google search, and what an enormous effect the ranking of the Google search, the articles that it returns, has an enormous effect on an undecided voter. This, of course, is orders of magnitude, far more powerful, far more significant, far more directive, if you like. So, Mr. Altman, maybe you can help me understand here what some of the significance of this is. Should we be concerned about models that can, large language models, that can predict survey opinion and then can help organizations, entities fine-tune strategies to elicit behaviors from voters? Should we be worried about this for our elections?
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Hawley, for the question. It's one of my areas of greatest concern, the more general ability of these models to manipulate, to persuade, to provide sort of one-on-one interactive disinformation. I think that's like a broader version of what you're talking about, but given that we're going to face an election next year and these models are getting better, I think this is a significant area of concern. I think there's a lot of policies that companies can voluntarily adopt, and I'm happy to talk about what we do there. I do think some regulation would be quite wise on this topic. Someone mentioned earlier, it's something we really agree with. People need to know if they're talking to an AI, if content that they're looking at might be generated or might not. I think it's a great thing to do, is to make that clear. I think we also will need rules, guidelines about what's expected in terms of disclosure from a company providing a model that could have these sorts of abilities that you talk about. So I'm nervous about it. I think people are able to adapt quite quickly. When Photoshop came onto the scene a long time ago, for a while people were really quite fooled by Photoshopped images, and then pretty quickly developed an understanding that images might be Photoshopped. This will be like that, but on steroids. And the interactivity, the ability to really model, predict humans well, as you talked about, I think is going to require a combination of companies doing the right thing, regulation, and public education.
Professor Marcus, do you want to address this?
Yeah, I'd like to add two things. One is in the appendix to my remarks, I have two papers to make you even more concerned. One is in the Wall Street Journal just a couple days ago called "Help, My Political Beliefs Were Altered by a Chatbot." And I think the scenario you raised was that we might basically observe people and use surveys to figure out what they're saying. But as Sam just acknowledged, the risk is actually worse, that the systems will directly, maybe not even intentionally, manipulate people. And that was the thrust of the Wall Street Journal article. And it links to an article that I've also linked to called "Interacting," and it's not yet published, not yet peer-reviewed, "Interacting with Opinionated Language Models Changes Users' Views." And this comes back ultimately to data. One of the things that I'm most concerned about with GPT-4 is that we don't know what it's trained on. I guess Sam knows, but the rest of us do not. And what it is trained on has consequences for essentially the biases of the system. We could talk about that in technical terms. But how these systems might lead people about depends very heavily on what data is trained on them. And so we need transparency about that, and we probably need scientists in there doing analysis in order to understand what the political influences of, for example, of these systems might be. And it's not just about politics. It can be about health. It could be about anything. These systems absorb a lot of data, and then what they say reflects that data. And they're going to do it differently depending on what's in that data. So it makes a difference if they're trained on the Wall Street Journal as opposed to the New York Times or Reddit. I mean, actually, they're largely trained on all of this stuff, but we don't really understand the composition of that. And so we have this issue of potential manipulation, and it's even more complex than that because it's subtle manipulation. People may not be aware of what's going on. That was the point of both the Wall Street Journal article and the other article that I called your attention to.
Let me ask you about AI systems trained on personal data, the kind of data that, for instance, the social media companies, the major platforms, Google, Meta, et cetera, collect on all of us routinely. And we've had many a chat about this in this committee. over many a year now, but the massive amounts of data, personal data that the companies have on each one of us, an AI system that is trained on that individual data, that knows each of us better than ourselves, and also knows the billions of data points about human behavior, human language interaction generally. Can't we foresee an AI system that is extraordinarily good at determining what will grab human attention and what will keep an individual's attention? And so for the war for attention, the war for clicks that is currently going on all of these platforms, that's how they make their money. I'm just imagining an AI system, these AI models supercharging that war for attention, such that we now have technology that will allow individual targeting of a kind we have never even imagined before, where the AI will know exactly what Sam Altman finds attention-grabbing. We'll know exactly what Josh Hawley finds attention-grabbing. We'll be able to grab our attention and then elicit responses from us in a way that we have heretofore not even been able to imagine. Should we be concerned about that for its corporate applications, for the monetary applications, for the manipulation that could come from that? Mr. Altman.
Yes, we should be concerned about that. To be clear, OpenAI does not, we're not off, we don't have an ad-based business model, so we're not trying to build up these profiles of our users. We're not trying to get them to use it more. Actually, we'd love it if they use it less because we don't have enough GPUs. But I think other companies are already, and certainly will in the future, use AI models to create very good ad predictions of what a user will like. I think that's already happening in many ways.
Mr. Marcus, anything you want to add on
Yes, and perhaps Ms. Montgomery will want to too, as well, I don't know. But hyper-targeting of advertising is definitely going to come. I agree that that's not been OpenAI's business model. Of course, now they're working for Microsoft, and I don't know what's in Microsoft's thoughts, but we will definitely see it. Maybe it will be with open source language models. I don't know. But the technology there is, let's say, partway there to being able to do that, and we'll certainly get there.
So we're an enterprise technology company, not consumer focused, so the space isn't one that we necessarily operate in terms of, but these issues are hugely important issues. And it's why we've been out ahead in developing the technology that will help to ensure that you can do things like produce a fact sheet that has the ingredients of what your data is trained on. Data sheets, model cards, all those types of things, and calling for, as I've mentioned today, transparency. So you know what the algorithm was trained on, and then you also know and can manage and monitor continuously over the life cycle of an AI model, the behavior and the performance of that model.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for a great hearing. Thanks to the witnesses. So I've been keeping a little list here of the potential downsides or harms, risks of generative AI, even in its current form. Let's just run through it. Loss of jobs. And this isn't speculative. I think your company, Ms. Montgomery, has announced that it's potentially laying off 7,800 people, a third of your non-consumer facing workforce because of AI. So loss of jobs, invasion of privacy, personal privacy, on a scale we've never before seen, manipulation of personal behavior, manipulation of personal opinions, and potentially the degradation of free elections in America. Did I miss anything? I mean, this is quite a list. I noticed that an eclectic group of about 1,000 technology and AI leaders, everybody from Andrew Yang to Elon Musk, recently called for a 6-month moratorium on any further AI development. Were they right? Do you join those calls? Are they right to do that? Should we pause for 6 months?
Your characterization's not quite correct. I actually signed that letter. About 27,000 people signed it. It did not call for a ban on all AI research. It only called, nor on all AI, but only on a very specific thing, which would be systems like GPT-5. Every other piece of research that's ever been done, it was actually supportive or neutral about, and it specifically called for more research on trustworthy and safe AI.
So you think that we should take a moratorium, a 6-month moratorium or more, on anything beyond Chat GPT-4?
I took the letter. What is the famous phrase? Spiritually, not literally. What was the famous phrase?
Well, I'm asking for your opinion now, though. So would you endorse
my
a 6-month
opinion
moratorium?
is that The moratorium that we should focus on is actually deployment until we have good safety cases. I don't know that we need to pause that particular project, but I do think its emphasis on focusing more on AI safety, on trustworthy, reliable AI, is exactly right.
Deployment means not making it available to the public?
Yeah, so,
You'd pause that?
my concern is about things that are deployed at a scale of, let's say, 100 million people without any external review. I think that we should think very carefully about doing that.
What about you, Mr. Altman? Do you agree with that? Would you pause any further development for 6 months or longer?
So first of all, after we finished training GPT-4, we waited more than 6 months to deploy it. We are not currently training what will be GPT-5. We don't have plans to do it in the next 6 months. But I think the frame of the letter is wrong. What matters is audits, red teaming, safety standards that a model needs to pass before training. If we pause for 6 months, then I'm not really sure what we do then. Do we pause for another 6? Do we kind of come up with some rules then? The standards that we have developed and that we've used for GPT-4 deployment, we want to build on those, but we think that's the right direction, not a calendar clock pause. There may be times, I expect there will be times, when we find something that we don't understand and we really do need to take a pause, but we don't see that yet. Never mind all the benefits.
You don't see what yet? You're comfortable with all of the potential ramifications from the current existing technology?
I'm sorry, we don't see reasons to not train a new one. For deploying, as I mentioned, I think there's all sorts of risky behavior and there's limits we put. We have to pull things back sometimes, add new ones. I meant we don't see something that would stop us from training the next model, where we'd be so worried that we'd create something dangerous, even in that process, let alone the deployment. But that may happen.
What about you, Ms. Montgomery?
I think we need to use the time to prioritize ethics and responsible technology as opposed to pausing development.
Well, wouldn't a pause in development help the development of protocols for safety standards and ethics?
I'm not sure how practical it is to pause, but we absolutely should be prioritizing safety protocols.
Okay, the point about practicality leads me to this. I'm interested in this talk about an agency, and maybe that would work. Although, having seen how agencies work in this government, they usually get captured by the interests that they're supposed to regulate. They usually get controlled by the people who they're supposed to be watching. I mean, that's just been our history for 100 years. Maybe this agency would be different. I have a little different idea. Why don't we just let people sue you? Why don't we just make you liable in court? We can do that. We know how to do that. We can pass a statute. We can create a federal right of action that will allow private individuals who are harmed by this technology to get into court and to bring evidence into court. And it can be anybody. I mean, you want to talk about crowdsourcing. We'll just open the courthouse doors. We'll define a broad right of action, private citizens, be class actions. We'll just open it up. We'll allow people to go into court. We'll allow them to present evidence. They say that they were harmed by, they were given medical misinformation. They were given election misinformation, whatever. Why not do that, Mr. Altman?
I mean, please forgive my ignorance. Can't people sue us?
Well, you're not protected by Section 230, but there's not currently, I don't think, a federal right of action, private right of action that says that if you are harmed by generative AI technology, we will guarantee you the ability to get into court.
Oh, well, I think there's like a lot of other laws where if technology harms you, there's standards that we could be sued under, unless I'm really misunderstanding how things work. If the question is, are clearer laws about the specifics of this technology and consumer protections a good thing, I would say definitely yes.
The laws that we have today were designed long before we had artificial intelligence, and I do not think they give us enough coverage. The plan that you propose, I think, as a hypothetical, would certainly make a lot of lawyers wealthy, but I think it would be too slow to affect a lot of the things that we care about, and there are gaps in the law. For example, we don't really
Wait,
know.
you think it'd be slower than Congress?
Yes, I do, in some ways.
Really?
Well,
Do you know that?
litigation can take a decade or more.
Oh,
I
but the
think you
threat
guys-
of litigation is a powerful tool. I mean, how would IBM like to be sued for $100 billion?
I'm in no way asking to take litigation off the table among the tools, but I think, for example, if I can continue, there are areas like copyright where we don't really have laws. We don't really have a way of thinking about wholesale misinformation as opposed to individual pieces of it, where, say, a foreign actor might make billions of pieces of misinformation, or a local actor. We have some laws around market manipulation we could apply, but we get in a lot of situations where we don't really know which laws apply. There would be loopholes. The system is really not thought through. In fact, we don't even know that 230 does or does not apply here, as far as I know. I think that that's something a lot of people speculated about this afternoon, but it's not solid.
Well, we could fix that.
Well, the question is how.
Oh, easy. It would be easy for us to say that Section 230 doesn't apply to generative AI. Ms. Montgomery, I'll give you the last word.
important
I'll yield,
start.
Mr. Chairman.
You
on the point of-
suggested, Ms. Montgomery, a duty of care, which I think fits the idea of a private right of action.
No, that's exactly right. And also, AI is not a shield, right? So if a company discriminates in granting credit, for example, or in the hiring process, by virtue of the fact that they relied too significantly on an AI tool, they're responsible for that today, regardless of whether they used a tool or a human to make that decision.